All right, family. Today's lesson, guys, let's talk about the squeeze setup. As we mentioned this morning, the squeeze setup is something that was created by legendary options trader John Carter. So this is not my idea. I didn't create this. However, every good trader is kind of a byproduct of the traders that came before them. And we can take bits and pieces from other great traders and kind of, take what we can from them and apply it, to our own personal trading. So as we've talked about, as you guys know, first and foremost, my view of the market is that it's a game of supply and demand. And my first goal, regardless of day trade, swing trade, whatever it may be, my first goal is to simply always follow the money. With that being said, I need to have a few setups, in my toolbox, in my playbook, that can help me identify great follow the money opportunities. Over the past few years, the squeeze setup has become and remains my number one setup for finding the best follow the money opportunities. So like we talked about quickly earlier this morning, guys, what is a squeeze? A squeeze is essentially when a stock begins to trade sideways in a very tight, pattern. This right here isn't a squeeze. We're up, we're down. That's a squeeze. When day after day after day, you're just trading in the same tight range on very, very low volume. When you get that in a stock or a group, that's kind of like a rubber band, just getting pulled to the side, building up all kinds of energy. At some point, that energy has to get released, and that thing is going to snap to the upside or snap to the downside. When we can identify the squeeze, all we need to do is monitor it and wait for that big volume, wait for that money to follow, and it'll lead us in the direction that squeeze is going to fire. So the squeeze, very easy to identify. It's a swing trade setup. It isn't something that happens every day, every week. However, when squeezes do present themselves on the bigger time frames, they typically turn into some very, very profitable moves. So the one we're going to discuss here today, guys, just a great example, is a trade from a squeeze I took back last winter. Now I've taken, dozens and dozens and dozens of more squeeze trades since then, obviously, but this one is just a great example to kind of showcase the power, showcase the follow the money methodology, and kind of, just put everything into the bigger picture for you guys. So identifying this squeeze setup. What we're looking for is a stock, or even better, an entire sector trading sideways, going absolutely nowhere on very low volume. And again, like we talked about, over the past week and a half or so, guys, the time to trade an individual stock, the best time to trade a banking stock or a financial stock is when there's money going into the financial group. The best time to trade a technology stock, whether it be Apple or Google, whoever it may be, the best time to trade that stock is when you've got money going into that given group. So taking the bird's eye view that we've been discussing here as a team, applying that bird's eye view and looking for squeeze opportunities in the given sectors can open us up to a boatload of huge opportunities in the individual names. So we'll break down this move here in finance. And again, guys, it's like a big pack of wolves. When the leader of the group, the entire financial basket itself, is trading sideways here, in early November, what do you think the individual names are doing? They're going sideways. Your Bank of America. Let me find that move. Bank of America. Going sideways. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all the individual financial stocks during early November were going absolutely nowhere on very low volume. Now, sure, if you want to monitor 10, 20, 30, 50, 60, 100 plus different stocks, do your thing, so be it. For me, I take the bird's eye view. I look at the sectors first, and that tells me what's going on pretty much in every individual name in that group. So through, our nightly preparation, We were able to identify day after day after day that the entire financial basket was in a squeeze, just trading sideways here, going nowhere on no volume. Well, again, when we can identify that in the sector itself, we know that every individual name, most likely in that group, is doing the very same. Whenever I see this, an entire sector squeezing, that is kind of, that's a big deal for me. All the lights start flashing, that becomes focus number one. And, here's breaking down, guys, the elements of how easy the squeeze trade really is. Number one is just to simply identify the squeeze. How do we do that? Simple nightly preparation. Review the charts of the market, review the charts of the sectors and leading stocks, and you're going to be able to identify squeeze setups. Step number 2 for trading the squeeze setup. You just want to remain prepared. The beautiful thing about the squeeze is that there's really nothing to do until that volume comes in. Once we identify it, we just have to continue to remain prepared and monitor that stock or that given sector and wait for, the next move, which is to simply follow the money. It's a very, very simple, kind of formula here, a very super basic setup, but everything we talked about in week 1 is kind of, caked into the squeeze setup and the approach I take to it. So through my nightly preparations, it's very easy to begin to see when an entire group is just going nowhere, trading sideways. When we identify that, we just need to continue to monitor that group, take our notes, and stay prepared to follow the money. How do we follow the money? We monitor the volume. So we're going nowhere here on nothing. And again, we're waiting. There's nothing to do. Because when there's no volume coming into the group, guess what? Like we've talked about, those stocks aren't moving. When do those stocks in this group move? When the big money comes in. When that big volume erupts. When is the best time to trade Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, JP Morgan? When money is coming into XLF. So I identified the squeeze. Myself and a lot of us in the Focus Trades team took our notes, continued to monitor it, and you're just waiting. And then boom, right there, November 28th, 2017, big time money. $1.7 billion out of nowhere came firing into the financial sector. That is that energy of that rubber band being released and snapping to the upside. And again, why is the follow the money approach just, so powerful and so key? There's a time and a place to trade a given stock. The time to trade that stock is when its group is giving us confirmations. Well, on 11/28, when the financial basket broke out of its squeeze here on huge volume, what do you think happened to Goldman Sachs on the 28th? Well, on the 28th, Goldman Sachs blew up on big volume and went on a tear. On the 28th, we'll take a look at Morgan Stanley, another financial stock. Well, on the 28th, Morgan Stanley broke out of its squeeze where it was seeing very low volume and went on an absolute tear. We'll take a look at Bank of America. When did Bank of America start to move? When should we have been wanting to trade Bank of America? Right here on the 28th, when huge volume came in and broke it out of its squeeze, pushing it on a killer move. And we can sit here and go through the book of financial stocks, and almost each and every one of them broke out of a squeeze on the 28th. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of financial stocks. How are we going to possibly monitor them all at once? How are we going to be able to see when the best time to trade those stocks is? Nightly preparation and taking notes on the big picture, taking that bird's eye view. The squeeze setup for me has led to my biggest profits from this easy process. I don't do research. on the individual stocks. I don't do homework on the different groups. I keep my preparation diligent. I take notes on the big picture, and I'm looking for my go-to setups. The squeeze just happens to be one of them. Made a huge trade in energy last winter, and again earlier this year. Same exact thing. Identify something. Through the nightly preparation, you're taking our notes. Back last summer over here, in the notes every day. Energy in a squeeze, energy in a squeeze, energy in a squeeze, low volume. Well, after you take that note for 5, 6, 7, 10 days in a row, you're all over it. And then using the follow the money approach, your time to take action is when the big boys show up. That was a great squeeze opportunity where if you just did the preparation, stayed observant, and followed the money, it went on an absolute tear. This is a sloppier example of a squeeze where energy was kind of getting bounced around this tight range, but all it took was 2 days of huge buying to break it out of that squeeze. There's another one right here, a few days before or after the financial move. And again, I personally and those I trade with in the chat room were all over this because of the process. We're going through our nightly preparation, looking at the bigger picture. Well, after 5 or 6 days of us writing energy going nowhere, super low volume, we're looking at the big picture and we say, hey, this thing is in a squeeze. It's going nowhere, sideways, on low volume. What do we now do, team? We continue to observe it and we just wait to follow the money. That little process, the nightly prep, identifying our setups, staying prepared, and following the money made me 25 or 20 grand overnight on that quick little energy move. So the squeeze is super basic. It is super easy to identify. And when you begin to kind of go look at some of the charts, just pull up some charts of your favorite stocks in the past, guys. You're going to notice a lot of big moves tend to come out of squeezes. You want to make a year's income on one trade? Here was a chance to do it on Amazon last year. Coming out of the winter, Amazon was in a nice tight squeeze. And again, here's the key, guys. No volume. No one's buying it. No one's selling it. That's why it's going sideways. All of that energy is getting built up. And then just boom. The big boys come in. That rubber band snaps. And we follow the money. And if you just stay on that wave, as long as that money is coming in, you're going to make big money trading over time. You continue to just look through charts. Powerful moves tend to come out of periods of quiet consolidations. Nothing going here. Most importantly, no volume. Boom. Big money comes in. That's when that squeeze fires. A shorter term squeeze over here, just a few days of us going nowhere, that squeeze snaps to the upside when the volume comes in. So I'm excited, guys, to jump into this setup with you because it's super simple, and regardless of, your level of trading experience, it's something you can kind of go through that full process with. We can begin to, as a team, identify squeeze setups. There was a beautiful one here in YY as of late. This was a squeeze to the downside. Step 1 for this setup would be to identify that squeeze. Going nowhere. Step 2 would be to wait for that big day of volume that breaks it out of that squeeze range and just follow the money. So my suggestion, guys, for a little bit of extra homework today is pull up some daily charts of some of your favorite stocks, some of the biggest names in the market, and look for periods where the stock was kind of trading in a tight range on very low volume, and then take note of the moves that kind of happened once that broke and what was behind those moves. And you'll notice that not only are the moves relatively strong, they all take place when that big volume comes in. Excuse me. So that's a little piece of side homework today. Go through some charts of some leading stocks in our market. Look for periods where it was going in a nice sideways range on low volume, and then observe what happens when the big boys come in. And you can do this, for any stock really, and you're going to kind of continue to see the pattern over and over again. Big moves tend to come out of periods of consolidation that get snapped by big days of buying volume. Here's Google. We're seeing a few great examples of the squeeze setup. Going nowhere, no volume, boom. That energy snaps, that rubber band snaps, move to the upside. BABA was one of my favorite stocks last year, presented us with a handful of great squeeze opportunities. This one was huge last winter. BABA was going nowhere, fired out of that squeeze. Another one here, trading sideways, follow that money as it breaks that squeeze. Got one here, you got one here. We're going nowhere on no volume. Buyers come in. So simple setup, guys. Again, I'm not the creator of this setup, so attached to this email are a bunch of videos from John Carter, the creator of this setup, explaining his thought process behind it, going over some of his bigger trades with the squeeze setup. And the squeeze setup is very easy to incorporate into the daily process. So here's how we can kind of tie in the squeeze. Step one, guys, is going to be continue to do, your prep work. And our prep work obviously is going to be the big picture of the overall market, the individual sectors, as well as the leading stocks. We identify squeezes by doing that nightly preparation, by taking our notes and just identifying on the chart a period where the stock is just going nowhere. So we have to do our prep work. The second way to execute on the squeeze is just simply, monitor it. Continue to monitor that chart. If you're looking at BABA and BABA is just trading sideways day after day on low volume, just continue to watch it. Relax. Continue to watch it. And then when that money comes in, follow it. Whether it be to the upside or the downside, that is the time to go trade that name. And the great thing is, guys, if you go look at individual names, they break out of squeezes when their group does. I had a great trade here on EOG last year. Broke out of the squeeze the same time the energy group did. Another great trade on EOG. Nowhere, no volume, boom. Right there. The beginning of November, energy sector exploded, so did EOG. So did other energy names. A smaller term example of a nice squeeze is gold recently. Gold going nowhere here in a sloppy squeeze in the daily, but big volume came in, broke that squeeze, it fired to the upside, and if you follow that money, it was a profitable move. Because gold was in a squeeze and broke out of one, things in the gold group did as well. JNUG was a good example. JNUG was in a big old squeeze here, going nowhere. When did it finally begin to make a small move to the upside? When the big money came in. This is a trade I took. I identified the squeeze in the gold group. I observed and monitored JNUG in its own squeeze. And then when the money came in, we followed it. So, observant, taking our notes, staying prepared, and then when that money comes, just follow it. The squeeze is probably the simplest trade we're going to cover as a team, but for me, it's been the most profitable and the most powerful. So, the squeeze ties everything we've talked about, together so far in terms of the big picture view, how the sectors affect the stocks, and so on and so on. Great example of how we can tie that into an actual trade. So, peep this video. More importantly, peep John's videos below on the squeeze setup. And I also attached a few of my favorite interviews with him that should serve as a great source of motivation to you guys. So, that's the squeeze setup. That's the one we're going to focus on this week. How to prepare for it, how to run scans for it, how to identify it, so on and so on. So as of right now, guys, the market making a little bit of a bounce, but a bounce on no volume is a bounce that doesn't get me pulled in. So I'm still sitting on the sidelines, and for what it's worth, we have Apple in a little squeeze at the moment. So we'll see what happens there. Take care, guys.